So just for a little bit of a reminder or maybe new news, Pulse of Our World, we usually do the first Sunday of every month. This year, I am honored to be able to share that teaching with Rabbi Cohen. It used to be just Rabbi Cohen teaching Pulse. Turns out we all have pulses. And I thanks for the eye roll, Alon. Thank you. It's what I count on, actually. No, but Pulse of Our World is this opportunity to kind of look at what's going on in our current events and see if or what the Jewish perspective is on it and what we might be able to bring of ourselves to the world at large and how the world at large affects us. So this week I have brought for us two articles from a website called eJewish Philanthropy. It's almost like one of the regular Jewish periodicals, but sometimes it focuses a little bit more on a scholarly or data-driven perspective. I know I like to look at eJewish Philanthropy for kind of new things that are happening in the Jewish professional world, programs or changes in like really high level staffing, like CEOs of federations are usually announced on EJP, but also articles like this, which tend to be more opinion-based articles. But what I loved about these two articles were they both pull from the same source material and have very different perspectives on it. So both of these articles are using the 2020 Pew report on Jews in America. So just show of hands, how many people are even vaguely familiar with the Pew report? Excellent. For those who aren't, Pew does a lot of statistical surveys in our country, and I believe they're an international organization too. Sometimes they do not just American surveys, and they do an every 5-year what is the state of the Jewish community in America. It was a really big thing in the 2015 Pew report that they started to come up with a new title for kinds of Jews. There wasn't just like Orthodox Jews and conservative Jews and Reform Jews, like all of them. There were now Jews of no religion, which they had started calling nuns, N-O-N-E, not nun, N-U-N. And so the newer one, the 2020 Pew report, continues that trend of talking about Jews of no religion. And so what we have here is two different perspectives. One looking at it saying, well, when you divide the world into Jews of religion and no religion, you're missing out on a whole lot of people. And another one saying, it's actually really important to divide them because Jews of no religion have a bigger likelihood of total Jewish non-engagement. Both valid concerns and both valid interpretations of the data. Pew does not tend to put an interpretation on it, just kind of a summary of what they're finding. So majority rules, which perspective would we like to start with? Of anyone who read the articles, read the articles beforehand. Yes, Randy.
Sorry, Jews of no religion.
You want to start with the one that says Jews of no religion are?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the end of the sentence. I'm sorry, Randy.
Yes, I would like to start with Jews of no religion.
Me too.
Awesome. So let's then start with the one that's titled "You Are Jewish Enough." That was the first one that I put in the chat, and I'm also gonna share it on my screen. Hopefully it'll be big enough for those of you on screen to see it. Thumbs up? Yeah? It's readable? Excellent. And, oh, I wish I had multiple screens here. Okay, there's more people here. There we go. Okay, sorry, it's hard to size things when it's not the way I want it to be. Okay, so let's start by following the same introduction that the article brings. Will someone read for us the first, let's say, 2 paragraphs of the article, starting with in the 21st century?
In the 21st century, America, being part of the Jewish community, is voluntary. The argument for Jewish communal engagement is that it adds meaning and beauty, which improves lives and betters the world. The learning one has access to and the support one receives are invaluable. Ideally, engagement can be accessed from any starting point. There are no prerequisites. The argument for Jewish engagement is not a moral one. It is an invitation to enjoy the richness that living a Jewish life offers. Therefore, it should not include holier than thou righteousness about who is more or less Jewish. Most Jews view Jewish communal affiliation as a choice, not as a moral or ethical imperative. They understand that you can be a good person without praying regularly, marrying a fellow Jew, giving to a Jewish specific charity, or countless other behaviors deemed good for the Jews.
Excellent, thank you. So I love that last phrase of the first paragraph. There are no prerequisites for Judaism, which struck me as this kind of, it felt almost like an epiphany kind of phrase. How many of us have heard, like, in order to come into Jewish space, in order to call yourself Jewish, you have to do some of these Jewish practices that it talks about in the second paragraph? Yes? No? Ish?
Sort of, yeah.
So Jill, say a little bit more about your perspective of how people are required or not required when they're coming into Jewish spaces.
Well, I mean, for me, because I did convert, so I have always worried, was I Jewish or not? And would people accept me because of a million different things? So I mean, obviously at Temple Jeremiah, I'm very accepted. And I especially like this, that you can be, it doesn't matter, you know, whatever you're comfortable with, that's how you're Jewish. So, but yeah, I've always thought, like, would someone think I'm not Jewish? I know.
Nice.
Because I wasn't born Jewish.
Yeah, so, and it's
Could people use their names when they talk? Because on the screen, it's hard to figure out who's talking sometimes.
I'm Jill. That was Jill. I was just talking.
And it's something that I've heard frequently from people who have chosen Judaism for themselves is I don't necessarily know the language. I don't
Right.
know the I don't have a grandmother's recipe for matzo balls kind of thing. Those are things that everyone else seems to have. Is it going to be enough for me to show up and say, well, I'm Jewish too, and accept me for that full Jewish self, whatever I happen to be?
Right.
Awesome. Charles, and then Dick.
Oops. So one of the things I found fascinating that neither of these articles, it talks about the perspective of what happens compared to the rest of the world, which whether you tend to be, call it affiliated, observant, practicing, or whatever, the rest of the world pretty much will think you're Jewish if you've got any sort of connection to the Jewish community and treat you that way. And I think for some people, it becomes something of a surprise when they run into that because they don't think of themselves as particularly in those categories, and all of a sudden they get lumped in with the Hasidim or something. And they discover that the world's not always a nice place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like when I was growing up, it was a big thing. If you're going to go out in public and tell people that you're Jewish, or, you know, wear a Schmutz Happens t-shirt, then you are a representative of all Jews everywhere. And you need to put out a persona that's not going to hurt any Jew anywhere. And the same is true the other way. Other Jews are also creating a persona for me with or without my permission, but the world does lump Jews all together by just that one title. Whether we look it, whether we act it, no matter what, that title seems to say a lot to the non-Jews of the world. Dick, and then Jay.
Yeah, two comments. The first one is following on what Charles said. There was an old phrase that I was introduced to, long ago, and it said, it went like this: it said, "You can forget you're Jewish, but the Goyim won't." And that kind of fits along with this. You're whatever you are, you're sort of a representative, or people of the non-Jewish community looks at you as representative of the whole Jewish community, good or bad. The second point I wanted to make is we've been down this road before, and it's sort of an ongoing question: who is a Jew? And we've, through the years on Sunday and Saturday mornings, we've had these discussions, and forgive me if I'm being repetitive, but I always go back to the definition by David Ben-Gurion, which I've mentioned before to this group. And it says, anybody who's Meshuggah enough to want to be a Jew is a Jew.
I mean, I think it counts, right? That you have to want to be Jewish enough to accept being a minority in the world, to accept anti-Semitism, to accept having that burden of other Jews on you, right? Like there's something special about Judaism, but it's also not easy. And I wonder, let's get to Jay and Alana, and then I'll ask my next question.
I'm Jay, just in case somebody thought I might be Alana. So Jewish enough for what? And that's kind of an important question. My parents were not Jewish. My biological father, who I never met, was Jewish. And that was my only genetic, it is my only genetic link to Judaism. Because of that, I chose to go through a formal conversion process. One of the first, in fact, it may have been, no, listen, one of the first things I ever did in a Reformed synagogue was attend some kind of Torah service. And there was this real interesting question about whether or not I should be able to walk around with the Torah, because that was before the conversion. I actually thought that I should not. I mean, it all worked out very, very nice. I was more than welcome there. The people were amazing and continued to be amazing through the conversion process. We've also had situations where one of our granddaughters at her bat mitzvah went up to read the Torah, and her step grandmother, Irene's brother's wife, was not allowed to be up there. In a conservative, that works.
I guess I have to get that.
I know, we don't have 1 3 movie or anything, but this lovely woman was not allowed to be up there as the Torah was being read by the person that she embraces and treats as a granddaughter.
Yeah,
So
can I-
there's Jewish enough for some things and not enough for others. If you, in my opinion, if you follow Leviticus, anyone who says, I want to be in a synagogue is more than Jewish enough to be a blessing to the Jewish people. But the question is, when you start getting down to some of the more interesting halakhic questions, where does one draw the line and how does one draw the line? And I think back when I converted in 2009, there were some real questions about what was appropriate and what was not appropriate.
Absolutely. And
Rachel, can I break in there, please? I want to just add a comment about, the recent experience, and I want to bring it out. One of the wonderful things about Jeremiah has been its acceptance and of non-Jewish people and things into the quote sort of family. And I had a 180-degree opposite experience when my daughter had a bat mitzvah. Her grandmother was welcomed by Rabbi Schreidman on the bima to say a few words one way or another. And it was a totally inclusive experience rather than exclusive. And to me, that's the strength of Jeremiah and always has been for all the 35 plus years I've been a member.
yeah, and it's one of the things that I love, and one of the reasons that I chose to be here also is because of there aren't really those prerequisites other than choosing to be here, which is, the most important choice that you could make is just showing up. Sue, no, Alan, and then Alon. It looks like they want to respond to it. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to speak to something that concerns me, and Jay touched upon it too, is that this is a conversation I think that only Reform Jews can have, because we aren't as judgmental as, for example, the Orthodox. The Orthodox cannot accept that we don't observe the way that they do. They're in my view, much more intolerant and judgmental, whereas we can have this open discussion and feel comfortable talking about what makes us feel comfortable.
Yeah, and it's a sentence that I really liked in the second paragraph of this article. The argument for Jewish engagement is not a moral one, right? What's that moral code that brings us to Judaism? To me, I heard it's not one that's motivated out of guilt. Well, I should be Jewish because if I'm not Jewish, then Judaism will die out and the Jews will die out. But I also found fascinating the argument for Jewish engagement, not Jewish peoplehood, not Jewish belonging, engagement. And it seems like the authors of this article, that's really how they're measuring Judaism, is how often you show up, not in what ways you show up, not what were your parents, not what does your movement say about you, if you belong to a movement or not, but how are you making that choice for your Judaism versus how are other people making that choice for you? Alon.
I'm always fascinated, I'm Alon.
Thank you.
I'm always fascinated by this human need to set up, I can't remember the word, levels or tiers of people, that people have to be superior in one way or there's always this one-upmanship amongst people. And for us, for Jews, it always fascinates me that we do this because we are so small. We have been so persecuted, whatever. And why do we not stay together? Just in general, I just don't understand that human need. The other question I had was, do other religions question whether or not their members are Catholic enough or Christian enough? Are we the only one?
No.
No. Okay.
We're not the only ones. There's definitely other religions, other social groups in the world. Of course, they're trying to decide who's in and who's out, right? It's our tribal instincts. Who's like me and who's not like me. And we Jews love to complicate things, right? It's not easy enough to say, it's not easy enough to say you're religious or not religious in Judaism, because Judaism's not just a religion. It's and you can trace that changing of identity of what does it mean to be Jewish throughout history. And now we're all of those things and none of those things all at the same time. So it's really hard to say, you know, my biological parent was Jewish, but I don't practice at all and I love to eat bacon. Does that make me Jewish? To some people, yes. To some people, no. To some people, it's I chose Judaism for myself, but I never went, you know, I never finished my conversion process, or I never even started one. But I love Jews and I love going to synagogue and I love being at Jewish communal spaces. Does that make me Jewish? Right? Like, there's no good way to define what Judaism is. So it's much, much harder to be able to say who's in and who's out, because it's such a complex identity. I don't know if that's Randy or Bill's hand up.
It's Randy's. Charles and I were a member of a synagogue that spent 4 years determining whether to put in our bylaws that only Jews could vote on at synagogue meetings, on committees, and serve on the board. And we had 2 very, very well attended all membership meetings. It was a very hot topic, and there was lots of other churches require that you join and identify as a member. And what if we got all these people who weren't Jewish and they wanted to vote things in that we would find unacceptable? And the ultimate decision was that the synagogue did in fact vote that in order that you could be a member, all you had to do was identify that you were Jewish. We did not require proof of a formal conversion process, but you had to say, yes, I am Jewish, in order to vote or serve on the board. I know there's at least one member of Temple Jeremiah who left that synagogue as a result of that vote. And I remember the heat of the discussions and the real ambivalence of what does it mean to be Jewish? And do you have to convert? And is it just identifying that you're Jewish? And what does it mean to be an affiliate, a non-Jewish partner of somebody who identifies as a non-Jewish partner of a Jew who is active at Temple Jeremiah? And we have some wonderful members at Jeremiah who are very active and who are wonderful contributors and who very, very much are very clear about the fact that their religious identification is something else, is not Jewish. Even though their children are in religious school and they're very involved in all sorts of wonderful activities and contribute a lot, I think it's this, how are you Jewish and who is Jewish is not an easy question.
Right. And one of the things that I love about our community and other communities that I've been a part of is more often than not, it's the non-Jewish partner in an interfaith family that is more invested in their Jewish children's upbringing than the Jewish partner. So at the congregation I worked at in DC, one of the things that was a tradition for them on Yom Kippur Day was they would give out these communal aliyot. And one of the aliyahs, one of the blessings for Torah, was all of the non-Jews who are a part of the community come up and bless Torah, which is not something that you would really ever see at another congregation, because that blessing includes a statement that says, God chose me as a Jew to receive Torah. And there would be people who got up, would run to the front of the sanctuary, their only chance to really bless Torah, and people that I never knew weren't Jewish, because they sat on committees and they were on the board and they were always the parent dropping off the child. And they were so involved that I would, oh my goodness, he's not Jewish. I was shocked. And I think that's one of the challenges that as the more liberal side of Judaism that we come to is we've found ways to open doors, which is wonderful. And I'm so for it. But how do we also find ways to celebrate all the people that walk into those doors and not dilute the Jewish feeling, but in fact, have it add to the Jewish feeling. So I'd like for us to add in another paragraph in our article here. We're going to jump 2 down to one that starts with the Pew Research Center. Will someone read this paragraph for us? Go for it.
The Pew Research Center started to change that with its 2013 survey of American Jewry, now confirmed by its recently released 2020 study, which highlighted how intermarried families raising Jewish children were drivers of Jewish population growth, thus dispelling the myth of the vanishing American Jew. Since Pew focuses on growing American secularity rather than intermarriage, it instead bifurcated the community between Jews by religion and Jews of no religion. No matter for those commentators who believe theirs is the only way to be Jewish. In this new study, they nevertheless find the opportunity to offer the same kind of vilification, just with a new name. It is equally misguided and destructive, and it's simply not accurate.
Great, thank you. We can see the author's perspective here. How many of us have heard the fear when Jews marry outside of the Jewish community suffers for it, right? I've heard it all the time, pretty much my entire life. Of course, you need to marry a Jew and have Jewish kids, otherwise the Jews will die out. Like that's the guilt part to it. There's so much guilt in our community sometimes. But here it's saying that these Jewish children of interfaith families are actually the ones who are contributing to the Jewish growth, not the ones who are hurting it. Which kind of takes that fear and totally says, not true, let's reverse it. We actually need to find more ways to have interfaith families if we want to survive. But the Pew report is going to stick to, you can only be Jewish of religion or Jewish of no religion. There's no inter anything option here. So how's that sitting? Jay, it looks like you have thoughts.
Well, it's hard to say no to that one.
You can say no.
No. Yes, I have thoughts. I actually like the paragraph towards the very end.
Great.
No, I keep,
Which one? I'll bring it up.
you say you're not Jewish yet or may never be, but.
Oh,
part of the
excellent. We're gonna
Jewish
get to all that.
household, Jewish adjacent enough. I think the first question is not, are you Jewish enough, but are you enough? Are you enough to sit on the board? Are you enough to vote? Are you enough to go to the meeting? Are you enough to bless the Torah? That need not be the same question. And there can be, distinction is not inherently evil. What's inherently negative is when distinction starts creating
Division.
not simply division. I read somewhere in the early part of Torah where there were some divisions going on. But when they start creating hierarchies and they start creating better than and less than, to be a Jew, I believe, according to the Reform movement and the 1983, whatever the hell it was, that decided was discussing patrilineal descent. a lot of what to be a Jew is, as far as sustaining synagogal life, is an affirmation. It's an assertion that you want to support something. And you could want to support something with, while consciously choosing not to be a Jew, not to reject the religion of your parents, not to go through the conversion process, can still play an extremely valuable role in the synagogue. We have friends that where one of the partners made a very conscious choice not to choose Judaism, but also made a very conscious choice to support the person's spouse, to support the Jewish upbringing of the children. So whether that person gets stamped as a Jew or not is, in my opinion, a much lesser question. As for the Pew Report, sometimes it is really useful to develop statistics using extremes, although I think extreme is the wrong word, primarily because you can track how those statistics change over time.
Right, and I think that the biggest comment to this article is they're using the not right terminology to figure out what trends that we're seeing. They're using terminology that is more inclined to exclude than to include. Jews of no religion end up stop being tracked at some point, versus Jews of cultural Jews, identity Jews, those different ways that we define Judaism. Can we track those better rather than saying the non-Jews? I think is what this article is trying to say. And because you already pointed it out, I do love the ending of this article. Will you read the 4 bullet points for us here? They're bullet points on the screen. They're not printed. It's whatever. Those 4 little
We
paragraphs.
propose an inclusive, non-judgmental approach as a new starting point from all Jews towards all Jews. Here are some examples. You say you're Jewish but haven't walked into a synagogue in 20 years. Jewish enough. Thank you for coming. We love you and want to learn more about what being Jewish means to you. You say you're Jewish but don't believe in God or the God of the Bible. Jewish enough. Thank you for coming. We love you and want to learn more about what being Jewish means to you. You say you're Jewish but your partner isn't, and you haven't decided whether to have kids, let alone how to raise them. Jewish enough. Thank you for coming. We love you and want to learn more about what being Jewish means to you. See a new trend here? And let's not forget, you say you're not Jewish yet, or may never be, but are part of a Jewish household. Jewish adjacent enough. And thank you for coming. We love you and want to learn more about how we can better serve your Jewish family. Jewish pluralism is a strength. Let that strength define us, not disparage us.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've got all these great different ways of being Jewish, whether or not it fulfills the halakhic requirements. That there are ways to be a part of Jewish community and Jewish communal life, including not actually being a Jew. If we look at our other article, all of those ways that we might define as the Jewish alternatives, having a regular Shabbat dinner, but not going to Shabbat services, loving watching shows like Mrs. Maisel and Fauda and Unorthodox and all of those cultural, out in the world cultural expressions of Judaism, but like not having any clue what kosher actually means. All of those kind of ways of Jewish expression, is that enough to be Jewish? And so they use this same Pew report and continue the conversation. We're going to read the second paragraph on this one. does eating or just the sentence right before, does eating or cooking traditional Jewish foods appeal more to Jews than fasting on Yom Kippur? Is it great to eat a brisket on Kol Nidre kind of stuff? Will someone read our second paragraph? Yes, according to?
Yes, according to the Pew Research Center's recent released report on Jewish Americans in 2020, personal individual activities are embraced by considerably more American Jews than those with social, communal, or religious dimensions. But in building vibrant Jewish communities, are privatized Jewish activities really effective substitutes for programs that bring Jews together? The new Pew data show that group, rather than individualized expressions of Jewishness, build Jewish social capital, the glue binding Jews to one another and enabling collective action. Contrary to the widely accepted progressive wisdom, which views all types of Jewish activities as equally valuable, the Pew study demonstrates that some are correlated with strong Jewish engagement and build Jewish social capital far more than others.
Excellent, thank you. So here, it's saying that all of those choices that a non-halakhic Jew might make, the food, the TV, the cultural component of it, they end up being individual expressions instead of communal expressions. And we don't have that opportunity to build the Jewish social capital unless you're engaging in communal expressions of Judaism, which, according to the Pew report, is Jews by religion, not the Jews of no religion. Cool. Shelley, it looks like the gears in your head are turning, Shelley. Either that or you're just frozen.
No, I'm just thinking about that. And it's a little bit off-putting, I think. I'm thinking in terms of so many of the young people in the city, or maybe in the suburbs, I don't know. But I've heard of so many groups that get together for a Friday night Shabbat service themselves. They just get together, have a Shabbat dinner at each other's homes. There's whole groups of singles, I guess, and newly marrieds, whatever. And they celebrate Shabbat in their way. And I think that is a wonderful, wonderful way of them coming back to Judaism or staying with Judaism, however. So I think, yeah, maybe if they get together socially, it helps more than just as an individual. But that's their choice. I have no feeling. I mean, I feel that I think they're doing the right thing, but that's for them to choose.
Great, thanks. Sarah, I see your digital hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not joining because I'm on the floor doing my exercises, which must be done. I think that I don't think anybody needs to see that. I think that throughout history, there has been a fear that if we don't stick together and avoid integrating with the Gentile community, our Judaism would somehow disappear. And we're so small anyway. There's always been that fear. The other side, the flip side, is that the more welcoming and inclusive we are, the more chance that we will not disappear as a community in the world. And it's unfortunate that there are different groups of Jews that don't really see the benefit of the inclusivity that does reap benefits, as I think we're talking about. It's sort of a quandary, which way? Yes, it's true, I suppose, that if there was intermarriage and the spouse that was not initially Jewish doesn't really learn something about Judaism, the children and the grandchildren, it may dilute it. And I don't have an answer to that one, but it is a concern. How Jewish is Jewish? Well, I guess for me, how Jewish is Jewish enough is so that our Judaism continues through the next generations. And how do we do that and still be inclusive when there are those who come into the community who really don't know anything about Judaism? That is a question I have, Rachel. I don't have an answer to that, but I think being inclusive is very important, but there's also the education aspect. And if we don't have the education and we don't know who we are as Jews, our next generations will know less and less and less. So do you have an answer?
Well, I think that it's what you've been saying is what the whole community's been saying is, how do we take away those barriers to access, make it easier to find Judaism and feel comfortable in Judaism, but also how to ensure that we have our own standards and make sure that the Judaism that we provide isn't a superficial Judaism. It's one of depth and one of quality, not just one of how many Jews are there in the world. It's not just about taking a tally, it's making sure that everyone counts and everyone feels that Jewishness as a part of who they are. Ken and then Alon.
I spoke about this in my second presidential address to the congregation at Rosh Hashanah, which is this topic of, is it enough just to say you're Jewish? And I think, what we're seeing here in this Pew study, which really needs to be read in conjunction with the prior Pew studies, is, what's the long-term trend? I think the good news is there's lots of people that consider themselves Jewish, and all of them, or most of them, certainly the Reform Jews, stopped their religious education at age 13, which is, therein lies the good news. But the question is whether we have enough connection, whether the trend shows that it really isn't enough to just say you're Jewish, to continue Judaism, because the connection to all those things that are important about Judaism become less and less. And you can see it in the Meisel article, where it talks about those who say, that are Jewish have so much less connection to things that will be important to keeping Judaism alive long into the future, including attitudes towards Israel, or just even attitudes towards supporting our community, or just being the things that are Jewish in values, like charity, making the world a better place. That some of that really falls off at the level where you have no further connection to Judaism other than saying you're Jewish. We're lucky here in Chicago because we have such a strong, large community that we can feel Jewish and be Jewish and see Jewish. But in other communities, even that doesn't exist. And therein lies my concerns.
In that in Chicago, not only do we have a large enough Jewish community that you can be on the street and hear some Hebrew and feel that Judaism in the world, but that there are enough variations of Jewish expression that there's probably going to be someone or somewhere that you feel comfortable with. If you're looking to find a connection somewhere. But in places like Nowheresville, Iowa, where there's only one option for Jewish expression because there's not enough Jews to have that variety, Right? Like, it makes it much harder to ensure that Jewish choice has choices rather than Jewish mandate, the one way to do it. Alon, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. My parents had 3 children, my 2 brothers and myself, all of whom married second marriages, non-Jews. And it's interesting for me to look at the offspring. So my nieces and my son. My son is Jewish. He was bar mitzvahed here, blah, 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 blah. My nieces call themselves cashews, being Catholic and Jewish. Now, one is partly Mennonite, but we won't go there. I'm telling you, we embrace diversity, but we all, including my nieces and clearly my son, have this Jewish identity. And I'm always happy when my nieces carry that forward. I mean, I don't worry about myself, but that my nieces carry it forward. And they're very clear about the cashew, and they clearly identify themselves, I think, a little bit more with Judaism because of our traditions that we do all the time. So I'm hopeful.
Excellent. And actually, thanks for that great segue, because that's kind of where I wanted for us to end up. Is the big thing that I read as a difference between the articles isn't the way to read the data. It's the perspective of the author of one of celebration versus one of fear. The Miss Maisel article to me sounds like one that's terrified of the Jewish future. And the Are You Jewish Enough article sounds like one that is so invested in the Jewish present that it wants to celebrate all the Jews that are a part of that. And Jew is a very large definition for that one. And like I said, I grew up in a community and in a time where the phrase of "you better marry a Jew and have Jewish kids, otherwise the Jews will die out" was said all the time. Like I was this, 10-year-old at camp, and they're talking about Jewish marriage to us. It was a little bit early. I wasn't thinking about that. But it's a conversation that's still happening today. Can Jewish clergy be married to non-Jews and still be clergy? Is a conversation that happens all the time, right? Like those kinds of sticking points to me sound like coming at the definition of Judaism from a perspective of fear. And I often try not to add my passionate opinions into these conversations, but I'm gonna this time, because I don't want to be the kind of Jew or the kind of communal Jew that is terrified of what's going to happen if. Mm-hmm. I want to be invested in the people right in front of me and the people that I have a connection to. And I think for myself, one of the ways that I do this work is by caring about that quality that I'm providing now, rather than the quantity of years that might be left in the Jewish community. If we do well now, there'll be a future. If we don't do well now and care only about the future, then we're missing a really important part of that chain. So you probably all know this about me. I'm more inclined towards the Are You Jewish Enough? And what I found fascinating was this article came out 10 days after my Erev Rosh Hashanah sermon, which tried to celebrate Jews of all kinds. So it's nice to know that I'm not the only one thinking this way. But I think that there is still a lot of work left to be done for how we can celebrate the variety of Jewish expression right now, right in front of us. And we'll get to tomorrow. Bill, I saw your hand. Do you want to wrap us up?
I agree with your philosophy.
I have to unmute.
Thank you.
We're good. Bill agrees with the philosophy. Oh, no, come back.
Now you, okay, go.
There we go.
Thank you. No, I believe in that philosophy. I think being inclusive to me has represented Jeremiah all the years that I've been a member, from 2 years after it began. And I've seen that growth in inclusiveness, and I find that very, very good. It gives me a good feeling. So
Rabbi Tarshish was one of the only rabbis in the Chicago area who would marry intermarried couples. And his explanation was that people may not be ready to make that decision at that time, but we shouldn't be turning them away.
Yep, and there are so many reasons why someone wouldn't choose to take on the Jewish title for themselves. But clearly it's not stopping people from engaging with Judaism, even if they don't define themselves as Jews. Look at our community. There's no reason, for me, there's no reason to exclude unless there's a real danger in there. And I'm not convinced of the danger. Keep trying to convince me, rest of the world, but I am not yet convinced.
joy of belonging. I think that's the way it really sells it.
All right.
I've heard that phrase somewhere.
Right.
So, bye, Bill. Thank you. Obviously, there's no right answer to this. There's no answer to this. It's an ongoing conversation, and I appreciate being in a place where we can simply have the conversation and let all of the opinions be out there. And if you want to continue having conversations, stay tuned next week. Not only in the afternoon of next Sunday are we welcoming Al Franken talking about voter rights reform, which is at 4 o'clock on Zoom. But at 9:30, Rabbi Cohen will be leading a discussion in preparation for that discussion, talking about voter rights and trends and things that we're seeing also in the world. So it will also be multi-access, and either here at Temple, here on Zoom, and I believe there will be another email sent out the second half of next week as a reminder with all the details necessary. All right, so Shavua Tov, it's Sunday, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks for learning with me.
Thank you. Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good discussion.
Just remember, schmutz happens.
Alan, it depends on your house.
House schmutz always happens. All right, bye everyone.
Bye, everybody.